Hello everyone. So on this day of 21st February 2023, me, Pooja Bua, Upasana Goswami and Anjali Rathore are going to present presentation on Wystan, Hugh, Auden and his poems from the Department of English, MKBU, Bhavnagar. So these are presenters. Now, these are points to ponder. First is what is war poetry, then W.H. Auden's life and works, then his first poem, 1st September 1939. His poem and reference and symbols are, which is in the poem. Second is in a memory of W.B. Yeats, his poems, theme, structure, and poetic techniques, and epitaph or tyrant. Poem, historical context, literary devices, structure and form and purpose of the poem. And last point, comparison of W.H. Auden poems with the war of Ukraine and Russia. Let's start. What is a war poetry? Because normally what W.H. Auden wrote is a war poetry majorly. So in a simple words, if you see, it's a naturally one can easily understand that poetry which is written for wars or has characteristics of war called war poetry. Some are on the side of war and which is called patriotic poetry, which honors sacrifice and bravery of soldiers. And the second one is our anti-war poems, which shows no glory in war but only suffering and destruction. Poetry which deal with subject of war. These two types of poetry are there. Now about W.H. Auden. So W.H. Auden, also known with his full name, Wystan Hugh. He was born on 21st February 1907. So today is his birthday also. 1907 in Yorkshire, England, and grew up in and near Birmingham, where he lived with his middle class family. He studied English at Christ Church, Oxford, and he also has interest in German language. For that, I refer uh, this article from 1930 to 1945. He used to teach in various places also. So he was a teacher also. Now, his earlier work considered poems by Auden in 1930 with the help of T.S. Eliot and the Orators in 1932. Between 1935 to 1938, he wrote three plays in collaboration with Christopher Isherwood and Louis MacNeice, and these plays built his reputation as left-wing political writers. Just before WW2 broke out, Auden left this place and moved to United States, where he met the poet Chester Coleman, who became his lifelong lover. So he won Pulitzer Prize for poetry for his long poem "The Age of Anxiety" in 1948, and this title became phrase which describes the modern era and mental situation of modern people. He published The Diest Hand and other essays in collection in 1962, which includes his lectures too. Now, in his early work, one can found exploration of teaching of Marx and Freud also. Now, these are some of his works, and these three poems we are going to deal with in today's presentation. So, first September 1, 1939. About the poem, the basic idea of the poem, and we can say historical background of the poem. So this poem published in the collection another time in 1939 after he shifted to America from England. When he was sitting in the bar on the 1st September in 1939, he heard this news. The title of the poem in itself refers to the date of the German invasion of Poland, which participated in the war, starting of the World War II, 1st September 1939, when Hitler attacked. Even though this is his best known poem at one time, he criticized the poem for its incurable dishonesty. He removed the final stanza in 1945 before repudiating the poem entirely by leaving it out of his collected shorter poems in 1966. This poem has nine stanzas in it, which tells the story of war in a form of poetry. Of course, it is a poetry. We cannot say prose because it has no typical rhyming scheme, but some words and last some words are matchable. So each stanza has 11 lines in it. This poem doesn't follow any particular rhyming scheme. In this poem, he gave idea and opinions on WW2 and also satirized government of that time. At first look, when one read, it seems to be a satire, but in that satire, there is also a suggestion that he gave to people that be loyal and honest with each other and love each other. He sees government with disgust and called it dishonest government in his poems. Cause at that time government used propaganda during war, time to rule on people. Now let's see. This poem has 9 stanzas. So stanza wise, let's see. First and two stanza, first stanza and two stanza. So this is a basic summary in my words, which I describe. A poem starts with the setting of the speaker sitting in the dive. Dive means bar on 52nd Street in New York. This is a place in New York called 52nd Street. He got the news that Hitler's attack brought a long dishonest decade, anger, fear, and darkness on earth. With that, there is one more thing he brought, and that's order of death on September, which is the starting of WW2 night. With the word accurate scholarship, one can interpret this as historians who can tell everything about history in which Martin Luther's works and ideas driven whole culture on Germans made. We can see that there is a that has driven a culture made who Martin Luther. Find what happened and how he means here a reference of a he. So he means Adolf Hitler, raised in Linz, that he became psychopath god. Here is a Linz, a reference of Adolf Hitler. This is his place where he raised as a child, and that's why what ideas throw in his mind. That's why he became a psychopathic god. Now we all know what everyone is learning. If we do something wrong to someone, there are possibilities they take revenge. So this line last: those to whom evil is done do evil in return. We can with this line we also see that cause after World War One, everything dealt on Germany. That's why Hitler raised and took revenge of Germany. Now there are some reference and symbols which is used in that poem. Now the third and fourth stanza, when Thucydides exiled from democratic Athens for a military failure, he wrote the history of Peloponnesian War. In this book, there is a famous statement or propaganda by him which includes Pericles' Paean, which reference here. If we see in Thucydides' book, we can see that how habit of pain is formed throughout the history, and now again and again we suffer from that. We must suffer them all again. Blind leaders use strength of common man of America, as we see in this stanza. Each country give excuses in their own language, but no one can live in this dream for much longer. Now, each language pour its vein means there is no difference that this particular country give excuses for war, but every country which is existing in this world, in their language, their leaders give so many excuses, and but no one can live longer in that euphoric dream. And legends are going to stare us and control us through the face of military force and other propaganda and wrong things. So in that line also he satirized a propaganda which is used by leaders and Kaiser government. Reference and symbols are of their imperialism, a policy or extending a country's power and influence through diplomacy or military force, which normally leaders are using that. Now, fifth and sixth stanza, the people who are in the bar, they are not aware about or don't care about what happened outside. They are just enjoying their life, like faces along the bar, cling to their average day. The lights must never go out. Like people which are in the bar, they don't care about outside. Like there is a war happening in the outside, but they are just enjoying their life in sitting in the bar. So light shouldn't go out and music shouldn't stop, so that no one can get worried about outside, and the furniture of the bar is giving the feeling of home. To make this fort assume the furniture of home. But in reality, we see where we are, and we are in darkness, where cause of war. No one is happy, and we are lost. lost in a haunted wood, children afraid of the night, who have never been happy or good. Here for this darkness, he used the example of children, like in the night, how children are afraid of darkness. We are also afraid of this darkness of war. So, in satirical manner, he says propaganda of leaders is not crude as we think. He said this thing that is not so crude as our wish. We normally leaders, we say Adolf Hitler, he is so cruel, but he satirically he says that it is not cruel as our wish. So for express about love, he gave example of Nijinsky and Diaghilev, and tell that what Nijinsky wrote about Diaghilev is true, but we all crave for self-love, isolated love, not for universal love. So, reference stanza 5 can be considered as a murder in the cathedral by T.S. Eliot, a modern drama. In the context that he talking about common people in the drama, common people are not concerned with the major events like execution of Thomas Becket. Like in that stanza, he says that people are not aware of war. But in this murder in cathedral, also when Thomas Becket executed, people are not aware about that. Why said militant press, matlab speech or propaganda which leaders use. Important persons, he called in satirically important persons to the leader. Nijinsky and Diaghilev are lovers. Valsav Nijinsky was a Russian ballet, and Sergei Pavlovich Diaghilev was a Russian art critic. Now the seventh and eighth stanza. When they came into their social life from private life, every morning they repeat their vow to be true to the wife and concentrate on their work. From the concentrative dark means we can consider consultative dark as a private life and ethical life as our social life. We change our color when we enter private life to our social life. Governors or higher position people wait and start their politics as ordered by their boss. Here, a governor also says as honest as a normal people, because governors has to listen about their boss, and what they say they have to follow that. He asked that who are going to release them, who can reach to the dead, and who can speak for the dumb, because now totalitarian started their game. Here is the game to resume their compulsory game. Compulsory game of whom? Leaders. Leaders start playing their compulsory game through the propagandas. Now, who can release a people? Who reads to the deaf and who can speak for the dumb? He asking question here. Now, his poetries can open up ideal and romantic lives which filled in the mind of common people. All I have is a voice. Voice means his poetry. The to undo the folded lie, which means leaders are telling lie. He is or he was fold the lie which is told by leaders. Leader speaks lies which can build the building who touch the sky. Which here is a reference of sky. Who buildings broke the sky, and a lie of authority. Authority here we can say authoritarian too. Then there is no state, but at the same time we are not alone, because hunger is the same in everyone. We are not alone who only can hungry. There is no such thing as the state, and no one exists alone. Hunger always allows no choice to the citizen or the police. Police or citizen, all are the same, and hungerness of all are the same. So we must love each other and care for each other. So here he says that we must love one another or die. Here conservative dark we can interpret as private life, ethical like society or religious life. Dense commuter, leaders or visitor. With the dense commuters, we can say this London Bridge people, which is referenced in T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. I have one voice means his poetry. Sensual man in the street, common people, authority leaders or authoritarian government. We must love one another or die. He changed this line in later version of the poem because he particularly hate this original line because love cannot avoid, even if may predict death. And then last and final stanza: people are in darkness without any defense, in an unconsciousness state. Yet we, human beings, are hoping for a light and exchanging messages. Defenseless under the night, or our world stupor lies. So for this pure love, speaker says, "Let me compose a poem, and my feelings like Eros, god of love, and dust human being. I myself rejected by the everyone cause of my homosexuality for the same reason which I wrote in the poem, but love is the same. So let me show my affirming flame through my poetry." He can relate this in this poem. In last, he says that the same thing which is happened with Ninjiski happened with me, that society rejected me. So here we can find in last it has an autobiographical element too. Under the light, in darkness, stupor, a state of unconsciousness, ironic points of light, windows in the darkness, or hope in unconsciousness, exchanging their messages, must showing love to each other. Eros, god of love, and dust, which is referenced there, is dust is a human being. Now Bellegarde in a very difficult situation, which has reference with W.H. Auden. So for further, I like to call Anjali Rathod.
In memory of W.B. Yeats by Wystan Hugh Auden about the poem. Wystan Hugh Auden elegy on the death of William Butler Yeats, titled in memory of W.B. Yeats. It is also a meditation on the role and place of poetry in the modern world. The poem is an elegy, but written in a different mood. There is no serious lamenting on the death of William Butler Yeats. It was written in 1940 after W.B. Yeats' death in 1939. It was the time when the world encountered the Second World War. This elegy differs from traditional elegy in which there is a serious lamenting on the death of a person. In the first person, while paying homage to the as poet, Auden succeeds in dying those magical bardic elements which violate his own conviction. In the second section, he separates the private man for his poetry, first by embracing it in a common humanity and its 20th century plight, and then by turning attention to his transcendent gift. In the third section, he literally buries it and moves to an impassioned statement about the efficacy to poetry in terms probably quite different from those Yeats would have wished. This is the original poem, analysis of the poem. Uh, William William Butler Yeats died during a winter on a dark, cold day, and nature was completely indifferent and unaffected. Yeats died in winter. The brooks were frozen, and all the airports almost uh, deserted. When Yeats died, his death was kept from his poems and remains unaltered by the fact that Yeats, the man, has now died. The, the statues were covered with snow, and the thermometers showed that the day he was died was a dark, cold day. The cruel coldness, which is exaggerated to be the January, exploited to lament the passing away of its. No ship row amid the morning's echoes of woods and deserted caves. Instead, the wolves run on the through the evergreen forest, unmindful of the poet's death. The implications is that the poem's life, even though the man may be dead, but the difficulty is that the man can no longer speak for himself. He became admirers. The Auden uses the word he became his admirers. It means that have no more. In the third stanza, Auden making a broader point about the immortality of poets, they survive or don't survive depending on who reads them and how those readers read them. Its last moments were spent around nurses in the hospital and he depicts its body at war with self. The ugly fact of bad digestion modifies the poems as the words of a dead man are modified in the guts of the living. Auden says that all are in the cell of himself where they are convinced almost of their own freedom. Here Auden used the word of the word cell. Cell is for cell mean prison. The repetition of the two lines at the end of the first stanza, re-emphasizing the need for different instruments to measure the poet's death. The day of his death was a dark cold day. Is the line is repeated. Second part of the poem, the poet says that W.B. Yeats was also silly and ordinary like us, and he was not an exceptional hero different from the common man. You were silly like us. Here, Auden says Yeats that you were silly like us. The suffering of Ireland turned him into a poet and made him write poetry. Poetry survives and gives voice to survival in a space of isolation. Ireland is still as mad as it was, and its poetry in the end has made no difference. Here, Auden uses the word mad Ireland. Mad Ireland is a Irish Revolution. Irish Revolution is a fight for freedom. These are powerful lines that strike at the heart of one's perception of the possibility of literature to effect change. These lines also refer to its criticism and involvement in the Irish independence movement. Third part of the poem, here, starting of the poem, Earth receive an honored guest. Here, Odin used the word earth. It means the dead body is entered in the dead body of it is entered in the earth. The poet says that the earth should receive it as an honored guest. The word vessel is unusual enough in this setting to require attention. The time is intolerant of the brave and innocent. It is different towards humans whether they are ordinary or celebrity. Poetry worships language and forgives everyone by whom it lives. It pardons cowardice and conceit. The dogs of Europe and human continue their intellectual disgrace. Despite despairing atmosphere around, the poet follows light. His voice remains unconstrained and persuades us to rejoice in life. The poet writes poetry like a farmer who grows vineyard of the curse in a rapture of distress. Auden says that the heart is dry like a desert, but the poet can create a living fountain in the desert of the heart. Even when men are inspired in the routine humdrum life, they can learn how to praise good or be hopeful. In rapture means big farm. Uh, the poem ends with a message that poetry can free man from routine life to make him praise the good and the noble. Theme of the poem, Auden was deeply influenced by philosophy, psychology, and political ideology like Marxism. Economic and political issues dominated the first half of 20th century and therefore Auden often used in his poetry. Auden's poem credits poetry with a different kind of power than the political kind. The power to voice private truths, creating a parallel or underground record of human experience. He repeatedly adds that poetry survives despite its seeming ineffectuality. Rational poet Auden loved Yeats, but is a rational poet. He doesn't lament his death in a traditional manner. He pays tribute to him, proving that poetry survives even in the cold, dark world of despair. Suffering. Suffering is inevitable, and the monarch kept his poems alive. Yeats was no more, but he lived through his poetry, scattered among unfamiliar readers and admirers of his poetry. Auden says that the rest of civilization moves on while a few thousand people would continue to remember the poet. Yeats never truly dies, even if his fame or reputation fluctuates. He endures forever in the public mind. Structure of the poem in memory of W.B. Yeats by Wystan Hugh Auden is a three-part of the poem that is further divided into stanzas of a different lengths. The first part of the poem contains six stanzas and written in free verse. The second part of the poem contains a single stanza which is rhymed A B B A C C D C C D. The third part of the poem is written in quatrains that rhyme A B B every line in seven syllable trochaic verse. The first part images what it was like when Yeats was dying. The second is addressed to the poet himself, and the third is much more traditional elegy. The poem commentary on the nature of art of W.B. Yeats' poetry and its importance during such a disastrous period. Poetic techniques. Auden makes use of several poetic techniques in memory of W.B. Yeats. This includes enjambment, allusion, and alliteration. Alliteration occurs when words are used in succession or at least appear close together and begin with the same sound. For example, dying day in the fourth line of the first stanza in section 1 or silent and suburbs in stanza 3 of same section. Alliteration of the words that reflects depression and desolation like death, dead, deserted, disfigured and disappeared and the others. All these alliterations shows the pain of that is veiled in the poem. The final section alludes to the tragedies of the Second World War that was brewing in 1939 when W.B. Yeats died. Further, I would like to call Upasna for Auden's another poem, Epitaph on a Tyrant.
Hello everyone, myself Upasna Goswami. Today I will give the W.H. Auden poem Epitaph on Tyrant. Historical context. Epitaph on Tyrant was written on the cubes of World War II, just a month before the Nazis' invasion of Poland. Although the invasion itself was a shocking flying in the face of the 1938 Munich Agreement that had a sought to contain Hitler's and Germany's territorial expansion. The war itself was not particularly surprising to the many observation of the time. Yeah. Epitaph on a Tyrant was published on 1939. In the same time, World War II is begun. It's possible too. The poet include the that time situation in this poem. The conflict between fascist and the left wing democration forces had already sparked the Spanish Civil War and the aggression of fascist dictators, particularly Germany's Adolf Hitler, had already embroiled, embroiled European in the intense diplomatic treaties. Introduction. W.H. Auden, Epitaph on a Tyrant, is a satirical elegy for a dictator. This was written in 1939 when fascism was overtaking Europe. The poem described an unnamed dictator as a kind of rage and narcissist artist determined to impose his cruel, simplistic vision of perfection on all of society. Literary device. Throughout this poem, the poet makes use of several literary devices. The include but are not limited to alliteration occur when the poet repeats the same consonant sound at the beginning of multiple works. For example, human hand had in a line three and laugh and laughter in line 5. Imagery can be seen when the poet uses a particularly interesting description. For example, when he cried, the little children died in the street. Anaphora can be seen when the poet repeats the same words or perhaps at the beginning of a multiple line, for example, and which beginnings line to 4 and 6. Juxtaposition occurs when the poet contrasts two imagery against one another. For example, the depiction of the tyrant as a poet, humoristic, and the leader of the country's armed forces. The meter. Auden was a master of metrical poetry, proficient in a vast array of a poetic form and techniques in this poem. He chose to keep his meter a little on the loose side. It's basically actual verse. Each line contained about the same number of strings, but the placement of the strings at the symbol count was from the line of line. Listen to line 1 4. There are some example. For example, perfection of kind was what he wrote after, and the poetry he invited was easy to understand. He knew human folly like the back of his hand, and was greatly interested in enemies and the fleet. Description line for 1 and 3 it contains 5 strong beats. Line 4 contains 4. Otherwise, the rhyming pattern is a loose, more like prose than song. This sightly prose, like a quality, adds to the poems like dry tone, which evokes a tragic political situation, thought, understatement, and irony. Structure and forms. Epitaph on a Tyrant by W.H. Auden is a short six-line epitaph that is contained within a single six-line stanza or C. In rhyming A B B C A C and use those exceptional meter with 4 or 5 strong trees per line. These qualities and add up to a brief and witty epitaph. The kind of epitaphs found in a graveyard or on a monument have to be short enough to carve on a headstone, pedestal, etc. As a literary form, therefore, epitaphs tend to be pithy like this one. The conscious stanza and exact rhymes nestily climb the poem's idea, driving its point home in a forceful and memorable fashion. What is the purpose of the epitaphs on a tyrant? The purpose is describe how dangerous tyrannical leaders like Adolf Hitler are to their own countries, and those they have or any power over. This specific tyrant is never named, but readers can easily imagine the sway he maintained over his uh, senators and over children in the street. Comparison of W.H. Auden poems with the war of Ukraine and Russia. I have taken this point from ChatGPT. Human suffering. Both Auden's poetry and the conflict in Ukraine and Russia involve human suffering, Auden's poem often deal with themes of loss, death, and the struggle of everyday life. Will the war in Ukraine has caused immense human suffering, including their displacement, injury, and death. Second is political context. Auden was a poet who lived through some of the most tumultuous political events of the 20th century, including the rise of a fascism and the Second World War. Similarly, the war in Ukraine has its root in a complex political and historical factor, including the largely of the Soviet Union and the tensions between Russia and the Ukraine. Third one is ethical questions. Both authors' poetry and the conflict in Ukraine and Russia raise the ethical questions about the nature of humanity and the morality of war. Auden's work often grapples with the issue of conscience. Will the war in Ukraine raise questions about the ethics of military intervention and the responsibilities of global powers in a conflict abroad? Last one is national identity. Auden was an English poet who often wrote about theme of national identity and belonging. Similarly, the conflict in Ukraine and Russia involve the questions of national identity and so, sovereignty, with Ukraine seeking to assert its independence from Russia. Here the work cited.